Welcome to the latest edition of Back to Boxing Basics with BBB. Following on from our first ever episode, an edition surrounding purse bids and explaining them to the more casual fan, we're going to look at the importance of boxing gloves themselves, just why they have such an impact, why they cause such discussion, and why this past Saturday night we saw a boxer in the ring have to change his gloves. For those that aren't familiar with what I'm talking about, that was Kell Brook. A lot has been made about his sensational stoppage of a long-time bitter rival Amir Khan. But before the bell rang, before they got in the ring together, we saw Brook change out of his fly boxing gloves. That's not me trying to sound cool. That is the manufacturer of his gloves that he initially wanted to wear, and he had to change to a pair of Grant gloves. Now, that was a stipulation in the contract between himself and his opponent, Amir Khan. I think it's important for fans to be aware that boxing gloves and not just what one fighter is wearing, but what the opposition is wearing, they both come down to part of the negotiations in this scale of fight anyway. I think it's different in terms of different shows and different levels of boxing, but when you get to that upper level with the bigger names, you've got two boxers there, both with a preference, maybe even a sponsorship deal or a sort of contractual obligation to wear a certain brand of gloves. Now, it came to light that as part of the contract, Kell Brook had agreed to wear these Grant gloves. Now, obviously, that had no bearing whatsoever on the outcome of the fight, on any of the result, any of the rounds, or the result itself. Brook got the job done. He dismantled Khan from first bell to the point where the fight ended in the sixth round. Sorry for any spoilers there, but if you if you haven't caught up on the result by now, we're at Tuesday at the time of recording. I think you're not really going to be aware of it. So from that point of view, there's a lot of controversy around that decision. It's obviously being glossed over the fact that Brook won, and there'll be many fans out there questioning just why a boxer would want to have a say on what his opponent's wearing, and basically that comes down to the way in which the gloves have been designed and made. Now, depending on what weight class you box at, that normally dictates the weight of the gloves, and gloves being measured in ounces. So from the super welterweight division, normally you're looking at a sort of 10-ounce glove, and the heavier you are, the heavier the gloves would be. I know from my very limited personal experience of boxing, there is a significant difference between how the gloves feel, even with such a negligible weight difference. Now, during a white collar bout, you generally would be wearing 16-ounce gloves, often referred to by pros and those in the know as pillows on your fists. And that's because just the sheer amount of padding in the that goes into the gloves to try and, in theory, reduce the damage that you can inflict and obviously receive. Now, one very sort of famous example was the Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor fight. Um, the weight of the boxers dictated that they would normally be wearing 10-ounce gloves, but both individuals contractually agreed that they would wear lighter gloves. Obviously, this favoured Mayweather. In theory, it favoured McGregor and giving him a bit more of a puncher's chance, but Floyd was obviously supremely confident that that was not going to have any impact or any negative impact on him, and ultimately allowed him to inflict a bit more damage and get the stoppage later on in that one. Now, as far as I'm aware, the weight of the gloves wasn't an issue for Khan and Brook, but it was the manufacturer of the gloves, the gloves themselves, the specific model, was dictated as part of the contract, and Brook, for whatever reason, thought he would get around that, tried to avoid that. Um, and you're thinking, well, why would Khan want that much power? Why would any boxer want to have that much say in what his opponent's wearing? And I referred earlier to the design of the glove. So if you've got that weight to deal with and to play with as a manufacturer, there's lots of different ways you can distribute that weight around the glove, whether it's padding around the knuckle area, whether it's more support around the wrist. And what you might hear referred to as puncher's gloves, generally they're going to be made from sort of very fine materials around the knuckles, horsehair being a very common one. And what that does, reducing the padding around the knuckles, putting more of the weight into the wrist or the backhand of the glove or another area, that's going to increase the sort of power. So if you're punching a boxer, it's going to hurt a lot more if there's less padding around those knuckles and the sort of the area of the glove that's going to make contact with ultimately your opponent's chin. So if you're a boxer in against someone who you know can bang, you know they're going to carry power anyway, it's in your interest if you've got that sort of pull and that sway in the negotiations to try and get a more padded glove to reduce the damage and the pain and the punching power that you're going to be on the end of. And I think that's possibly what Khan was looking at. I know another very famous example of Glovegate was Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury, although that seemingly happened after the fight. Lots of videos doing the rounds, lots of pictures of Fury's gloves apparently showing very little to no padding in and around the knuckles, and something was one of the seemingly dozens and dozens of excuses that Wilder knocked out that he was going to use to sort of justify why he'd was on the end of the loss against Fury, and a lot of his fans and a lot of the Fury critics were showing sort of these images of the gloves almost folding in on themselves. What I would say with that, and just to sort of dismiss that, is nothing was said at the time. Now, again, this is aimed at the sort of less knowledgeable boxing fans, so I think many may not be aware that in these sorts of fights, in this very high level of contest where the finest of margins can make a difference, both boxers will have representatives from their team, their trainer, their coach, someone they trust in the opposition changing room before the fight, watching them get their hands wrapped, watching the gloves get put on. And it's normally at that point, and that seems to be the case with Kell Brook, at that point before the fight, any concerns are raised. And often it's sort of this very last minute panic, mad dash of whether the fight's going to go ahead or not. And 99% of the time it does. One side concedes to the other, or they go back, or they agree on to do what the opposition want in terms of just getting the fight over the line. There's talk of Kell Brook not getting paid if he didn't wear these particular gloves. Obviously for him, it made no difference at the time. He stayed calm. That sort of thing can fall under the category of mind games, where, as I say, the boxers are trying to get any possible advantage that they can, whether it pays off or not. Obviously, it didn't for Amir Khan. Nothing was raised with Fury and Wilder till after the fight. So these sorts of things, they can be raised, and they can be used as a little bit of as I say, mind games, a little bit of a negotiation tactic, or a scare tactic, trying to get in the opposition's head. And you've got to think anything at that last minute, anything to sort of throw your opponent's game plan and mindset into turmoil, probably going to be worth a try. But ultimately, it wasn't the case for Amir Khan on Saturday night.